Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Immigration Q&A hosted by the Canadian Immigration Institute. My name is Alicia Backman-Biharry. I am an immigration lawyer with Holthe Immigration Law, and I am joined by another immigration lawyer, Cédric Marin, who is also with Holthe Immigration Law. So good morning from I guess Western time here in Canada, and Cédric's got a different time zone, so good evening for everybody else who may be listening around the world. So Cédric, we've got another draw that's just happened yesterday, so things are still moving. We do have continued 2-week draws happening under express entry, and we wanted to talk about that as people filter in here. And for sure, when you join in, you can give us a shout and say where you are joining from, and let us know where you're listening in from today. And yeah, we wanted to talk about a couple things today. There's been a few moving parts in immigration, and Cédric's been very busy on YouTube. Mark's been very busy trying to get some more information out about the new open 18-month work permits that may be available to certain categories of people. So we've been doing lots of information about that, and then today's the general live Q&A, and we'll go through the program draws. So we just had that express entry draw yesterday, and then if people have questions about express entry or about this new public policy open work permit, for sure you can ask your questions, and make sure to put a Q in front of them so that we know that you're asking those questions. In the meantime, you can tell us where you're listening in from. So
Yeah, so we have sort of interrupted. I just see a lot of people here. Hey guys, Masood. We have watching from Moncton. We have Hubal. We have some more Axel. Hi Cedric and Alicia. Amy again. How are you? Nice to see you guys. We have Abdul Kadir from Nairobi, Kenya. Wow, this is already so many people joining us at the very beginning. How exciting. Young. Hi Alicia and Cedric. And now we're having some more questions filter in. So let's talk about express entry. This draw that just took place.
for sure. And normally Mark is here, and Mark is doing something that's very worthwhile. He's going to be getting some more information about this new program in terms of the public policy for the open work permits. So he is out there getting some useful information and figuring out what's going on. And so Cédric very kindly decided that he would help host today. So thank you, Cédric, for that. And yes, we can turn to the new draw. It did happen yesterday, so August 3rd. And this was another round of invitations. It's still a smaller round, so there are only 2,000 invitations to apply that were sent out. The CRS cutoff, so this is the big question that everybody wants to know, right, Cédric? I don't know about you, but a lot of the consults, people are saying, okay, I have a score of 500. Is it likely that I'm going to get an ITA this year? And it is interesting to see what's been happening. So the score yesterday, the minimum cutoff was 533. So take a look at that CRS score, 533. When it first opened up, so keep in mind that these invitations to apply had been paused. They had been no invitations to apply since September 2021. They did start again in July 2022. They started super high, right? So they are slowly coming down. Yeah, if you take a look at the previous rounds of invitations here, you can see that there was a giant pause. They were only doing provincial nominee programs. They weren't doing the no program specified draws up until July 2022. It started with a 557 CRS, and then 2 weeks later, July 20th, we were down to 542, and then now in August, we're at 533. So that the CRS number is creeping downwards slightly, but that's still a really robust score. For most people, that means perfect English, maybe perfect French, or maybe some French, and Canadian work experience for most people in order to get that high of a score, plus foreign work experience even. So, Cédric, any thoughts on this new draw?
Yeah, so we're seeing it's about every 3 weeks is a draw is taking place, and what I found was curious is that we're slowly ramping up, right? So slowly taking more and more applicants. Um, each draw, so we could maybe think that the next one's going to be 2,250. I don't know, but it's always interesting to look back to see at what was happening before COVID, right? And so, before COVID, when things were under control, they were taking 3,600, and the CRS score was also much lower. So, fingers crossed that this is going to get we're going to get back to the same 3 weeks draw, and then we're also going to get back to closer to 4,000 per draw.
That's right. Yeah. And we'll have to see, right? How quickly will they increase the overall numbers of invitations that they are giving in each round? Because of course, if they keep to this low level of 2,000 rather than 3,000, it's going to take a longer time for those people to get through the system. And you can take a look at who's sitting in the pool of candidates right now. So this was updated as of August 2nd. The draw, of course, was August 3rd. So this, keep in mind, this was the day before the draw, and the pool was sitting at and looking like this. So you still have a large number of applicants that are above 501. There's still almost 9,000 people. I guess you will have lost 2,000 of those people. So probably we're down to about 7,000 people who are sitting above the 501 CRS score.
And Alicia, a question for you. So we've seen here actually. So if we go back too far back, if we go back here, so we're talking about no program specific draw, and
Mhm.
if we look, there's still about 640 people that are over 600. So are
Yeah.
those individuals were they called in the last draw? Like how does it work for the PNP? Do you have to get a PNP specific draw?
No. So even if you have a PNP nomination, that's a good question, Cedric. So let's say you were sitting at a CRS of 300 and then all of a sudden you got your PNP nomination. So that gives you the 600 points. Then you don't have to wait for a PNP program specific draw. So for example, I had a client yesterday that was included in the all program specified or no program specified draw, even though they had the PNP nomination. So anybody who is above the minimum cutoff of the 533 will be able to benefit from that ITA. Now, of course, there is that tie breaking rule. And so this is why it says tie breaking rule there, January 2nd or January 6th, 2022. So what that means is if you happen to have a CRS of exactly 533, and you had submitted your application before January 6th, 2022, then you have a better chance. Or if you submitted that application up to January 6th, 2022, you have the ability to get that ITA. If you submitted your profile, your express entry profile after that time, then you may have lost out on that ITA even if you had a 533. And that's why it's important for you to have a current express entry profile that you've updated and made sure is correct. If it's going to be expiring, make sure that you renew it and put in a new express entry profile as soon as you can, because the longer you've been sitting in the pool, the greater the chances that you will get that ITA because of the tie breaking rule.
And very interesting. So in other words, these 640 were picked up yesterday, and then we do 1,400. So we still have, so people can actually calculate it depending where your CRS score is. You can kind of calculate, every 3 weeks there's a draw. They take 2,000 people. Obviously things changed. We've already seen
Yeah.
draws, right? With what was the biggest draw that you've seen, Alicia? I'm actually curious.
Well, that was the Feb 13ers, right? So that was back and it was massive. It was a giant draw. It was the biggest draw ever and it was insane. And so that was the hugest pool and that was because they were so that was in 2020, I believe. The years are blurring on me now, Cedric. But that was the draw that they picked. It was like 27,000 people. It was giant. And they picked everybody, basically. They scooped everybody who
Here
had
we
a
can go.
CRS. Have you found it?
And sort by the biggest draw. So yeah, we can just actually click here. There we go. 2021. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So, sorry, February 13th, 2021.
Lowest scoring is 75.
It was 75 CRS, right? So that was giant. It was different than anything else that had ever happened in Express Entry. People were completely caught off guard. Nobody
Wow.
thought if they had a 75 CRS that they would get a draw, but a whole bunch of people did. So yeah, right before when we were in the thick of pandemic, they wanted to try to give people who were in Canada that ability to transition to permanent residency. And so they did, and they did in droves, and people were rushing to try to get their language tests updated and to try to get their medical exams, and it was a bit of chaos.
So the advice that I'm hearing right now is even if you have a lower CRS score, and you're interested in Express Entry, to create a profile because this could happen, but also we haven't talked about it in this podcast, but the occupation specific draws could take place as well, right?
That's right. And we don't even know what that legislation will look like. So maybe it's occupation specific, or maybe they probably have the flexibility to say we want to prioritize French speakers, or we want to prioritize people who have a certain background or profile or education or anything else, as long as they can justify it with an economic incentive measure. So it does remain to be seen. And this is why we're saying, don't panic if you don't have a CRS of 533. There probably is going to be legislation that's going to be passed in the fall. In Canada, we've got a summer recess, and so people are not around for the summer. That things will start back up in September, so we'll have to see what happens with that legislation. And there is also a private members bill, and so this is what some people have been asking about as well. Members Bill 44 that has passed and has given the Minister of Immigration 120 days from May 11th to try to create new pathways for students, international grads who are in Canada to try to find a way for permanent residency. So it might be that they're going to be tweaking points or creating a new program as well. So that remains to be seen also.
Very interesting. And question a lot of people have as well, a lot of my clients get as well is, when are we going to go back to pre-COVID levels? I'm saying about 1 year, 18 months, right? Depending on the math, depending on how many people they accept. Do you share that same point of view?
Um, Probably. And the reason is that even though there are so many people in the queue right now, the overall levels plan is going up. So every year, the Department of Immigration has to pass what they project their targets to be for various categories under the federal programs. And so for the economic categories for federal skilled worker, federal skilled trades, and CEC, they have said that overall the numbers will go up. And so I think Cedric, you and I had looked at this because there was a
Yeah, we
question
did.
about
We
it
already did, yeah.
last week. Yeah.
Well, there we go. It's a little bit small for people joining us, but here it is. This is what you would Google.
Yeah.
That's what you can find, but you can see the target, low range, high range, and next year. So definitely a great time to immigrate to Canada. Lots of they're going to be taking a lot of new individuals.
Exactly. Yeah. So, Cedric, I'm not able to see the questions, but if you're able to see the questions on your end and people are starting to ask questions, we can probably jump right in.
Let's do it again. This is in the last few weeks I've been hosting my own live streams and I've been doing my best to kind of figure everything out. So we're gonna work on a better program and figure out how to do this. But so for now I'm the only one who can see the questions. Um, and here is a question from Ibrahim. He says, "Hello, thank you for the live stream. My question, can I travel outside Canada with my student visa after graduation without applying for postgrad work permit and come back to country?"
And then, this is one of those ones where if we had our little triangle, we would ring it in the background there because this is a very specific question. Ibrahim, I'd never want to tell you something where you're going to lose your status without knowing all the particulars of what's going on in your life and your circumstances. However, I can answer a general question that you need to be really careful. Everybody who has completed their Canadian studies, you have a 180-day window usually within which you can apply for your postgrad work permit. And if you have left the country, depending on the processing times and depending on what happens with travel restrictions, it might be very difficult for you to get back inside Canada if you have a temporary residence visa that has expired, for example. There are lots of moving parts on this one. So be very careful. Usually, as soon as people have finished their program of studies, they will make sure to apply right away for their postgrad work permit. And the benefit in doing so is, and I did write a blog on this, Cédric, and I think if you pop over to our website and you go to resources and under our blog, this happened a lot actually under the TR to PR application when that program was announced. And a lot of people didn't realize that when you've completed your studies, as soon as you are notified that your course of studies has been completed, you have to stop working for a little bit of time. So if you go back, and it's can students be working after the end of studies in Canada? It's on the second page of our blog under the older posts, and it was posted back in April 26th of 2021. So there it is. So can students be working after the end of their studies in Canada? So this relates to Ibrahim's question because there's this window of time when you are able, as a student, of course, to work part-time while you're a full-time student, up until you're notified by your school. Either you have your final transcripts, or you get your degree or your diploma, or you have your graduation ceremony. Whatever it is, you have to stop working on that day. And then you cannot work at all in Canada until you've actually submitted your postgrad work permit application. And this is a regular postgrad work permit application. Now, the benefit is as soon as you submit your postgrad work permit application, the day that you do so, you are then eligible to work under immigration's interpretation without even having received that postgrad work permit, as long as you properly submitted it in time. And so what this does is it gives a little bit of buffer. It gives a little bit of extra time for people to start working towards their Canadian work experience that you can claim for express entry. If you leave the country, you lose all of the benefit of that kind of extra bonus time. So those are a few general comments. If you do have specific questions, Ibrahim, reach out, book a consult. We'd love to talk to you to make sure that you're setting yourself up in the best way possible for your immigration goals.
Yeah, let's head on over to our website, Health Immigration Law, and then you can see here book a consult, or at the very top, speak with a lawyer, and then you can take a look down here and see Chanel, and click for Chanel to book an appointment, and then you can also see Alicia's, I apologize, Alicia's availability to book a consult. So, Alicia, lots of experience. Obviously, I mean, you wrote the blog. A lot of experience dealing with this, and a lot of TR to PR students were caught in not knowing this, right? And where they continued
Yeah,
working, and when they actually shouldn't have been working, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, there we have it. All right, next question. Fernando says, "Good afternoon to both of you. Have a great weekend." Oh, good afternoon to you too, Fernando. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, trying to find questions here who could be applicable to everyone. Um, Sorry, just give me a second. Juliana here says, hello from Brazil. All right, question from IRB Fox. You'd already joined us on previous live Q&As. Let's see what's going on in your case. All right, so you say, for my unaccompanied dependent, the completeness check states digital photo required, but in the checklist, all that mentions are passport, upfront meds, and birth certificate. Do I still upload digital photo?
And I'm assuming that this is an express entry application, though it's not quite clear. So I guess that's one thing that you can clarify. Um, so yes, there, and Mark refers to the completeness check. I always, if it's an express entry file, I will always double check the program guidance on the completeness check. Cedric, have you gone through the completeness check yet?
Let's take a look at it right now.
Yeah,
Completeness.
so it's the If you search A11.2 completeness check and express entry IRCC, it should pop up for you.
There we had it.
Yeah, assessing a application. There you go. So this is a very helpful tool to look at if you are doing an express entry application. And this is the program guidance. And so Section 11.2 of the Immigration Act is the authority basically that governs whether it's a complete application. And if you don't have a complete application, game over. You're done. They can just simply refuse your express entry file. You've got to restart, do a new profile, start again all over from the beginning. And right now, those invitations to apply are like gold. So you don't want this to happen. So you want to go back, you want to check, make sure that you understand the completeness check, the A11.2 requirements. And this is program guidance that immigration officers will look at. For sure, if you need help with your application, you can reach out to us. This is what we do on a daily basis for clients is review your express entry application EAPR with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything is perfect. Um, but when you look on here, it does have some program guidance on what you have to do to make sure it's a complete application. And so in the case of the question, we're talking about, and I don't know exactly where it is in here, but they're talking about unaccompanying family members and photo requirements. So if we can find it, this is where they'll be looking at it. But this is the completeness check. What you also have is in your individual express entry application portal, you will also have your document checklist. So if there's a discrepancy between these two things, there's a few ways to deal with it. You can try to include other, oh, there you go, certified photo, original documents. Those are
Copy. There
translations.
we go. Digital photo. Sorry, we're on the wrong link. We're on the very technical one. But here's the general idea, right? Here's what we're talking about. So here are the
Yeah.
requirements, and here's who must submit this information, right? So in your case, even, oops, pull up the question again. Um, Unaccompanied dependent, right? And here we have dependent
Yeah.
child who is unaccompanying. So yeah, you do have to provide it. So
Yeah.
there's,
And
yeah,
exactly. So if you have an indication that you do need to provide the digital photo even for unaccompanying children, then there are ways to be able to put that in your Express Entry profile, right? You can combine that digital photo in the client information upload field or in a different upload field and label it so that the immigration officer knows why you're doing it.
yeah, and this is actually a really interesting question. It goes a little bit further as well. Like we see the document checklist that you get is not that you get from IRCC inside your portal is not the law. It's not the requirements. It's just a pre-populated field of stuff they think you need to provide. So it does happen sometimes where a document says required that is actually not required. Or you have been situations where you've done your due diligence and thankfully you've checked and the checklist says one thing and the document online says the other, but thankfully you've caught it and yes, you do need to have a digital photo. We've checked. This is again assuming that it is express entry.
That's right.
Let's see, IRB Fox says yes, it's for express entry at PNPITA. So there we have it, and there we have it. All right, let's try to find another question here. So unfortunately, I can't. I don't have the emojis for some reason, but Tessira says, "Hi, Alicia and Cedric. How are you?" Uh, Axel with a question here says, "Do we disclose travel history between home country and my country of residence? Thank you." I actually just had this question moments ago in a consult, and yes, when you do have the travel history, it's not worded properly. It's going to say country of origin or residence, but what they mean by that is yes. So, for example, if you're a student and you came to Canada in 2018, right, there's going to be your residence is now in Canada, and so if you're going to be going back home after in 2019, 2020, 2021, it has to be disclosed, right? So internal within the country does not, but we're actually talking about leaving your country of residence, leaving your country of origin. It has to be disclosed. All right.
Yeah, it is interesting, Cedric, depending on what kind of permanent resident application, some of them say, um, you don't have to disclose if it's travel between your country of origin,
Oh, interesting.
travel back and forth. So it does depend on the permanent resident application stream that you're pursuing and exactly what it says on the form in terms of the travel history. However, if in doubt, I would always prefer to be more thorough and not leave it out. If it's something that you can clearly look back through your passports, you have a good travel history, and you can simply put that onto an additional page or spreadsheet if it's longer than what you can get in the express entry fields. Um, I know that there are some different opinions on how to deal with travel history when it becomes really long because the program has upload maximums. So there are some specific wrinkles that people run into if they have extensive travel history as well. So yes, if in doubt, make sure to put it. You do have to be really careful to cross-reference all your prior applications. So if you're at the express entry stream and you had a postgrad work permit and you had a study permit before that, and maybe you even had a visitor visa before that, and you've put different travel history throughout the years, you've got to be really careful to go back and review all your prior applications and make sure that you are being thorough and consistent, and that if there's something you've missed, you make sure to correct that when you're doing your express entry profile.
There we have it. Let's try to find the next one here. I saw a comment that my microphone was too low there. I just put it a little bit louder. Preston said he probably needs a new headphones. Very hard to hear you. Oops.
Oh no.
Afria says hi from Bangladesh. All right. Trying to find some questions here. A lot of questions about CRS score again. We kind of covered it already. Just to go over it, we don't know when the score is going to drop back down, right? So the only thing that we can do really is 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 look at the amount of people who are being called, look at the amount of people that are inside of the pool, and try to give estimations. So questions here about 460, 470, 480. Unfortunately, um, I we can only guess, and we already talked about this earlier in the video. So go take a peek at what we said earlier. But again, if you look at how the frequency and the amount of people that are drawing, we're thinking, for the next 6 months, probably higher than 500, and after, about 6 months, a year, 18 months, going to get back down to the 400s. All right,
Yeah.
Jojo has. Oh, go ahead.
Sure. I was just going to mention Mark is messaging us here saying that he wanted us to announce that he will be going live this afternoon at 2:30 because there are a number of questions that we simply haven't been able to answer because there weren't details that were announced in the open work permit public policy. So he is doing a technical briefing with immigration officials and the Canadian Bar Association, and he's hopefully going to get some of those answers as we speak, and we'll be able to help clarify some things. He's going to go live today at 2:30 Mountain Standard Time, and hopefully that will clear up a number of outstanding questions. So thank you to Mark for that.
All right. Yeah, there we go. It's super interesting. For those of you joining us recently, I just want to bring you back to our YouTube. We have lots of videos, lots of content right now actually um, being published on what is happening for the postgraduate work permit holders. So we have the breaking news that we did. Here's Mark's upcoming stream. You can go online here and put your notification. And then we have here I did a video yesterday on the interim work authorization. So if your postgraduate work permit expired in a certain period of time, you're going to receive on Monday, August 8th, a letter allowing you to return to work. So take a look at this, and then we have Mark's live Q&A, but we have more details on the postgrad work permit extension. So Alicia did a video, I did one with Mark as well, and then we have our regular streams as well. We also have a short blog, and if you head over to our website, a short blog that I wrote on the interim work authorization. So in practice, it should be as easy as providing the email from IRCC, your expired postgrad work permit, but I talk about here about providing a letter of explanation. I talk about here about having email attachments, providing the webpage by IRCC. And don't forget, so a few tips and tricks. So head on over to our website if you're interested to learn more about the interim work authorization.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you to Cedric for getting that blog up there. That's really helpful for a lot of people because there's going to be a lot of confusion, I think, with employers and with workers who are trying to figure out, well, do I actually have authorization to work right now? And this is a big deal because you never want to be in a situation where you are working without authorization in Canada if you are a foreign national, because it is a breach of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and regulations, and it could make you inadmissible. So it is very important that you are making sure that if you are working, if you've got some transition between that PGWP and you're trying to figure out whether you apply for this new open public policy, whether you're eligible for it. Maybe you get an email, maybe you don't get an email with that interim authorization to work. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, and you'll want to double check and do your due diligence to make sure you are authorized properly to work in Canada.
Yeah, I wonder what employers are going to think when they just get an email from IRCC, which I don't think has ever happened, saying, yeah, you can work. I mean, hopefully there's an attachment. We'll see. We'll keep you posted on what's happening.
Yeah.
So we have an interesting question here to do with how to calculate when you started working. So Jojo
Hmm.
says, "Hi, hello, Alicia and Cedric. If I'm employed as an insurance broker, however, I started training prior to be licensed. When would my years be counted towards my PR application for CEC?"
Hmm. So, Cedric, if you want to pop over to the ministerial instructions regarding express entry,
Let's do it.
and that is the law, right? This is where we're going to be able to actually drill down and figure out what are the technical terms here. And so, what Jojo's asking has to do with Canadian work experience. And if you drill down to section 15 of the ministerial instructions, here you go. So this is what the law is with respect to what will qualify as Canadian work experience. And of course, you're going to get a different number of points depending on how many years of Canadian work experience you can validly claim. So yeah, so if it depends if you're applying on your own or if you have an accompanying spouse or common law partner, of course, but there's going to be some specifics in terms of what constitutes Canadian work experience, which is under section 15 sub 3. And so if you look down here, for the purposes of this section, Canadian work experience is work experience that. So these are the requirements that you have to meet to be able to properly claim whatever you've been doing in Canada as valid work experience. It's got to be acquired by a foreign national in Canada. So you can't be working outside of Canada in one or more occupations that are high skilled. So currently that's NOC A, B, or 0. It consists of full-time work experience or a full-time equivalent for part-time work experience with one or more employers. So you can add up your part-time and full-time work experience. It's got to be acquired within the 10-year period preceding the day on which points are assigned. And it has to be remunerated through wages or a commission. So you actually have to be paid for this work. In addition, if you keep scrolling down, so I guess that's one question with respect to, what you were doing before you were an insurance broker. Was that paid work? The other thing that we'll get to is whether you are a full-time student, because that's not going to be eligible either. So, but we'll keep going down here through the ministerial instructions because this question is valid for a number of people who are trying to figure out how do you calculate or when do you start claiming your Canadian work experience. So the other thing is that there are some extra requirements. So for the purposes of this section, section 15, on what constitutes Canadian work experience, a period of employment during which the foreign national was engaged in full-time studies is not included. So if you were doing any of this while you had full-time study or student study permit status, it is not a section of or a time period that you can claim as valid Canadian work experience for the purposes of CEC for express entry. The other thing that's important is a period of self-employment or unauthorized work is not to be included in calculating a period of work experience for CEC. So you need to make sure, just like we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, are you authorized to work after the end of your studies? So that that same blog article that's on page 2 of our blog on the older posts back from April of last year, that's going to be important too. What was the date that you graduated or were notified by your college? When did you submit your PGWP application? If you validly submitted your PGWP application, that's the day that you can start calculating, in general, your Canadian work experience, as long as it's not self-employment or unauthorized work, and as long as you maintain your status. So that's the next caveat. You have to have valid status during that period, and they will cap it out at a maximum of 30 hours a week. So you can work 40 hours, but you can't say that you worked 40 hours and then tack it on to try to get your full year of work experience sooner than a 12-month period. So that's the long answer, but it does depend. You'll have to be careful to make sure you meet all those requirements for whether you can claim that as Canadian work experience.
And Jojo has a quick follow-up question. They say when can they start claiming the experience? Assuming that they have the status, was full time, it was paid, assuming that all these requirements you talked about are fulfilled, is it going to be the time they got the insurance license, or when they started training?
And this would be a question where I'd need more. I'd need to understand a little bit more from Jojo about exactly what happened there, because a lot of people are also confused. On your Express Entry profile, there's another question that says, when were you first authorized to work in this occupation? Because you've got to give the primary NOT code, and then you've got to give your NOT code for each occupation. And it really does depend, depending on what profession you're in, when an employer would validly hire you for that job depending on your training and experience. So there's a few things that would need to be clarified before we can delve into how to answer that question.
There you go. Very detailed answer. All right, let's try to find some more questions. Sam has a question regarding the postgrad work permit and the SIN number. So Sam says, "Thanks, guys. Thanks for the video, guys. Postgraduate work permits will have to uh, will we have to apply or reapply for the SIN numbers?" So this is something actually I think we talked about already. I think in one of the videos. Do we have further clarification on the SIN numbers? What is going on?
I don't think we have further clarification. So for everybody who's listening, if you have an expired postgrad work permit, then in Canada, you have a social insurance number, and that social insurance number is a temporary number for foreign nationals. Canadian citizens or permanent residents have a permanent number, and so you can always work on that social insurance number. You have no requirement to have a work permit. However, if you are a foreign national, if you are here on a PGWP, then your social insurance number, your SIN number, would be tied to the length of your valid work permit. When those expire, then it's very, very hard to try to convince an employer that you have valid authorization to work. You're going to have to get a new work permit in most cases in order to be able to get a new social insurance number. Now, in some cases, employers understand. For example, during the pandemic, there were delays. The federal government had fairly significant delays in issuing new social insurance numbers. And as long as the employer could properly show that they were paying the employee, they had an employment contract, and that employee had a work permit, then even though that person didn't have a social insurance number for a few weeks or maybe even a month, they would be able to go back and prove that they had done things correctly. With respect to these new open public policy work permits, we'll have to see what happens with the interaction between immigration, what immigration is saying, and what the Social Insurance Service Canada is saying in terms of how they're processing those applications. But as long as you have the valid work authorization, that is what should give you the authorization to work for an employer in Canada. It's just a matter of convincing your employer of that, and then a matter of that social insurance number actually being issued probably after the fact.
So
And this,
not easy.
it's not easy, and the reason that it also causes problems for people is that in many provinces, the issuance of provincial health care is tied to the social insurance number.
Yeah, it's
So,
yeah. A lot of unknowns, but with the interim work authorizations, finger crossed they can go back to work, be able to get those SINs, and convince your employer to do so. And again, I think employers have very strict employer compliance regimes, especially large employers. So they're very careful, right?
yeah, and so this is where all Canadian employers, of course, have to be properly paying their employees. They can't take advantage of foreign nationals. They need to make sure that they are properly doing their payroll remittances and deductions to the Canada Revenue Agency. So it is a very important thing that employers are following the rules. Keep in mind that if you have the work authorization, that should authorize you to work. It's then just a matter of convincing Service Canada to reissue the social insurance number and hopefully also your provincial healthcare authorities to reissue the provincial healthcare coverage.
We have it. Familia says, hello from Brazil, Alicia and Cédric with the accent aigu. Wow, look at this. Thanks for this question. How reliable do you think it is the 6 month processing time that IRCC promised for invitation to applies for these new draws? I could
Mhm.
be wrong, Alicia, but I think the promise was 6 month processing time by the end of the year. Is that the promise?
So, the reason that the immigration minister said that they had paused the all program or no program specified draws since September of 2021 was he was saying the backlog, that processing times had gotten so huge that immigration officers needed to be able to get through the queue of people to be able to draw that down back to the regular standard processing time. So Express Entry has a processing standard that 80% of cases should be determined within a 6 month time period from the date that the EAPR is submitted. Now, keep in mind that there are delays sometimes on the applicant side in terms of updating passports or medicals that may have expired or police certificates that need to be refreshed and reobtained. So there's other things too that can definitely slow down the processing of an application. But the immigration minister is saying and projecting that they should get back to being able to process these applications within their 80% of cases within a 6 month time period. So it remains to be seen. We're going to hope that that's what's going to happen sooner rather than later.
I mean, it's in everyone's interest, right? I mean, Canada, in a way, is competing for skilled immigrants versus other developed nations, right? And and there's a lot of unfilled jobs in Canada. We need people to come work. Applicants have been waiting
Yeah,
a very long time. They're affected by COVID. It's just a win-win-win all around if we can properly get more qualified, high-skilled immigrants into Canada.
absolutely. And I'm curious, Cedric, if you check the processing times right now
Yeah,
on Express
let's do
Entry,
it.
what does it actually say? I checked the other day and it wasn't coming up. There was an error message.
Yeah, I just want to go back very quickly to this question. It says, how long for Canada spouse sponsorship from applications for May 2022? And I just want to show this to everyone. This is not anything secret, but if you head on over to check processing times by IRCC, and then here you can actually find your application. So let's start with Alicia's question, which was the PR. And sorry, was it skilled workers or keen experience class? Which one are we interested in?
Um, well, we can check both and see if, I mean, generally people are probably going to be either under FSW or CEC, but if you're got a score of 533, you probably were under CEC. You probably have some Canadian work experience.
So if you're outside Canada, yeah, no prior Canadian work experience, no Canadian education, you're most likely to be applying under the skilled federal workers. So it's 26 months. Again, this doesn't actually break down the type of application, right? It doesn't break down the application is complete, and this is where we talked about passports being expired or documents need to be updated, forms need to be filled out, verify information, respond to requests, other factors like COVID. And also this doesn't break up by region, right? You have applicants from various regions and whatnot. So this is the standard one, but it's important that if you're thinking about Express Entry and you have you're thinking about it seriously, keep in mind that if you're in Canada, you're probably going to be under the Canadian Experience class, and you're talking about 14 months. But you would, in some cases, once you get your acknowledgement of receipt that you've at the invitation to apply, you might be able to qualify for bridging open work permits. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is that what is currently on the check processing times is a current snapshot of how long it's taking right now. And so in the past, immigration had a policy of kind of giving averages and projections, and now they have changed to more of a real time, this is how long it's taking for people who are in the system already. And that's different. So if we're looking at a forward looking processing time for new applications that are now being submitted under the current draws, then this 14-month processing time period may no longer be accurate, of course, because as immigration officers work on clearing that backlog, it should go down and we should be closer to the 6-month, hopefully, standard processing time.
We have it. Interesting question from Ria, and I think this came up in maybe, I forget where, but it came up somewhere for me for the last week. Let me just send it to you as well, Alicia. So the question, Ria says, can principal applicant, i.e. a person being sponsored, do all the process of spousal sponsorship application? So there's a form, you have to actually detail your relationship, and it has to be signed by both the applicant and the sponsor, and some documents have to be done by the spouse, by the person being sponsored, other by the sponsor. What do you think?
So this comes up more and more with the new online spousal sponsorship portal. And so it used to be in the past that spousal sponsorship applications were paper-based applications. And this caused no ends of trouble because you needed signatures on the form, which meant that if somebody was overseas, you were mailing back and forth these application forms for both parties to sign to be able to submit. Now there is the new online spousal sponsorship portal. And it is interesting because I have had cases where people mistakenly signed up under the Canadian spouse's email account. And if you look at the IRCC sponsor your spouse through the portal page, it clearly says on there that the person who is signing up for the account should be the principal applicant, the spouse being sponsored, the foreign national. And it does say that, nobody else is authorized to access this portal other than the principal applicant. And so I haven't seen what will happen if people mistakenly do this all through the Canadian spouse's email address, but immigration seems to be saying that it should all be through the principal applicant, person being sponsored's email address. And the person being sponsored is the one, of course, who has to sign the electronic declarations that their online application is complete and true and correct. And so be very careful if you are doing an online spousal new portal application, that the principal applicant, the person being sponsored, is the one who's signing up with their email account and who is properly doing those certifications and declarations. And the other thing is be very careful that, you still have to get the spouse's signature, right? There are two forms, the IMM 1444 and the 5532, that also have to be physically signed, or like an ink signature that's a scanned document from both parties. And on the one form, you've got to sign in two places. Both parties have to sign in two places. So be really careful with that to make sure that you're doing your spousal sponsorship application correctly.
Yeah, and I think this was a question that came up in a live stream. Someone said, "Do they have to sign the representative of use of representative form?" And I said, "Yeah, what do you think?"
Yeah, and I've had that come up with a client just recently on a spousal sponsorship where they've retained us to do the spousal review. And if you are, and there's some program guidance on this. So if you look at the complete guide and then the quick guide for spousal sponsorships, it does give you some instruction in terms of who needs to sign those use of representative forms. And in this case, because the spouse overseas was living in an address, a country that doesn't have very specific addresses, right? Some countries won't have a postal code, or they won't have like a house number, or it's just kind of a region. Because of that, the principal applicant wanted to appoint their spouse to have their mailing address. And if you do that, if your spouse is the person that is going to be on the immigration forms for the mailing address of the principal applicant, even though you're not living together, then it says specifically that a use of rep is required in those circumstances, for example. So there are specific cases where you do have to have a use of rep. For example, if your Canadian spouse is putting their mailing address as your address. And of course, you'll explain that in your letters of explanation.
Right. So generally speaking, someone who's a spousal to the application, who's applying, they're going to be sharing information, submitting this together. They don't have to give a use of rep form. It's really going to be limited cases, right? Those cases that
It-
we
It's
talked about.
it's usually specific instances. Yeah,
Because there are paid, right, immigration, there's paid representatives, but we also go into unpaid representatives, right? And these
that's
unpaid
correct.
representatives is, I think, this what you were talking about, where family members, friends, and this gives them access to the file, right, to actually go and have access to your personal information. But like this is like the spousal, you're signing it together, you're in it together, you're not representing one another, you're not accessing other person's information. In fact, Alicia, as you've told me, it's a quite an intimate process making a spousal application. If you've had previous marriages that the other partner's not aware, or kids, right, it can get quite interesting sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it is definitely, there's a whole world of spousal sponsorship, interesting developments. So, yeah, just be careful. Make sure that you look through that application. If it does seem like you have to authorize your spouse because the spouse is using their mailing address for your mailing address, you will have to do a use of rep, for example. There are some very specific cases where you would need a use of rep. Um, Sometimes, if you're not able to understand that application because you speak a different language, that might be another instance as well.
There we have it. And for those of you just joining us, we are the Canadian Immigration Institute, and we're both Canadian immigration lawyers. And here's our website, Health Immigration Law. And we talked about it previously on the blog, but on the live Q&A. But we have tons of blogs that can help you out, depending on your visa was refused, learning, about spousal. And Alicia, you've written about accompanying spouses and unaccompanying spouses, and work permits that we're talking about, working experience. So head on over to our website. If you'd like to speak with a lawyer at the very top here, you can go ahead, and here we have Alicia, and you can book a 25-minute or 50-minute consult. We have Chanel as well, one of our colleagues, and I'm here at the very bottom. I keep saying very bottom, but actually, if you keep scrolling down, there's Mark, the founder of our firm, and Mark right now is actually doing a postgraduate work permit. Um, Canadian Immigration Institute doing a postgraduate work permit course. So it's a master class that he's hosting, which is going to tell you more about how to apply for the postgraduate work permit extension. So if you head onto our website, you can actually subscribe to our newsletter, be updated about blog posts, new courses, and all that. And if we head down here, you can learn more about the course that he is offering. So he's doing live videos. He's also doing some pre-recorded videos, and you have access to these videos to ask him questions and also access to the community of other people who are going to be applying. So it's a great program if you have a postgraduate work permit and you want to learn a little bit more. So there we have it. We're almost at our 1 hour mark, so we're just going to take a few more questions here, and then we're going to go. And there's an interesting question I saw here about Sahil, and Sahil says, "Can someone be living in Ottawa sorry, Sahil says, can someone be living in Ottawa and working for a Montreal company hybrid be enough to show intention to live outside of Quebec? So I think here I'm just making some assumptions here. You have a express entry profile, you speak French, you're trying to claim the French points and your intention to reside outside of Quebec. It could also be a case where you might be under the francophone mobilité for your LMI exemption, right? To not have to go through a labor market impact assessment. So we don't know all the context here. But what are your thoughts? I think it's less about the company and more, but it is a factor, right? Would you agree?
So this is always important. So because Quebec has its own provincial immigration process, they do not fall under the regular rules for express entry. And so if you are living and working in Quebec, it is entirely possible that you will not be approved under your express entry application unless you can show that you have a valid intention to live somewhere in Canada other than Quebec, anywhere other than Quebec. And the more ties you have to Quebec, the harder it is going to be to prove an intention to live somewhere else. So express entry will not allow you to be living in Quebec. You've got to prove that you're not going to be living in Quebec. And so if you are working in Quebec and your prior Canadian work experience was in Quebec and your employer's in Quebec, this gets harder and harder. So you're going to want to look at all the factors to show that you have a solid intention to live in Ontario, for example. And so, what does that involve? A driver's license, a long term lease, something from the company showing that they're going to transfer you to the Ontario offices, hydro bills, phone bills, things like that once you've moved to show that you are living in the new province, and maybe even connections with family members if you have siblings, parents, or maybe even a spouse. Hopefully, they are living somewhere other than Quebec as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it comes down Quebec driver's license. I think I've already mentioned it, but it's really a case by case, very specific, right? It less to do with working for a Montreal company, more to do with your personal situation. All right. Sunal Kadim says hi, hi, hi to you too. Hope everything's well with you. Um, Questions. So this Anna's question here. Let me just pull it up. It's an interesting question. Not so much with what she's going to ask, but more generally. So Anna is asking, please advise if we can apply along with a postgraduate work permit extension for a spousal open work permit. So I have a lot of clients where they're kind of this in the weird situation now where they have two or maybe three options for a work permit. And yeah, what would you recommend?
So this is one of the things that we are still waiting to hear from the immigration minister and the IRCC program departments about because it's not clear. There was nothing that was indicated specifically in the program delivery instructions about spouses. So the only thing that we can fall back on, and I think Mark and I pulled this up at the end of our last live that we did, was the general rules on who qualifies for a spousal work permit under the C41 LMIA exemption codes. And in general, under the normal rules, spouses of postgrad work permit holders will only qualify for a spousal open work permit if they can prove that the principal applicant, so the person who is on the postgrad work permit, is working in a skilled occupation, not A, B, or O. And so we don't know what will happen with this new public policy open work permit. Maybe it's the same rule. Maybe that if you can prove that the principal applicant's spouse is working in Canada in a high skilled job, then maybe the spouse will be able to apply for the open spousal work permit. But we don't know. So we hope that Mark will be getting some insight with that right now as we speak, and we'll hopefully be able to provide some more clarity this afternoon at 2:30.
There we have it. There's so many great questions here, guys. There's some very specific ones. There's a little bit more broader ones. Again, if you'd like to speak with us, we can't give legal advice on our YouTube. We're just providing legal information. So book a consult with us. We can look more into detail into your specific situation and whatnot. And we're for sure going to be able to update individuals on the different work permits um, and the different avenues for the time being, I think this is going to be it for us, guys. We're pumping out a lot of content. I think about 5 or 6 hours this week of content. So I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Alicia, for hosting this. It's fantastic to be able to answer so many questions, engage so many people, and the next live Q. Well, we have Mark's at 2:30 Mountain Standard Time. That's going to focus on postgrad work permits, and then on Tuesdays, 9 a.m. London, UK time. So if you're in Canada, it's nice and early. I'm currently teleworking, but if you're abroad, it provides a lot of flexibility to meet with me in the morning, in the afternoon, a little bit more flexibility if you're abroad, or if you're an early bird in Canada, it works well for you. So there we have it. Any closing final words, Alicia?
Just don't rush on that open public policy work permit. You have some time, so make sure that you are being careful with this application. It is a one-time application. So if you are issued it and there's something wrong with it, there is no extension possible for it. So take your time. We are developing the course. We have lots of tools for people to be able to do this properly. If you do need more help, we're here to help. You can retain us and we can go through this with a fine-tooth comb with you to make sure that you have the longest period of time so you can hopefully gain that Canadian work experience for your express entry applications in Canada.
There we have it. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, and we'll see you. Yeah, we'll see you on the next live Q&A.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.